everyone. What a great crowd. You are here at the panel for Trump 2.0 and the shifting media landscape. We have a very disciplined 45 minutes only. That's 9 minutes apiece, so we better jump in. I said this at the Supreme Court panel, but it really is the same. You know, normally this panel, any of the last 11 years at Rancho Mirage, we'd have gone over the challenges of making an economically viable model in the internet, social media age, or the starving of smaller municipal papers, hostility in the courts. There's actually been some noise at the High Court about revisiting New York Times versus Sullivan. All of that, however, seems like small beer today. I think there's a strong argument to be made that we are living through the most challenging time for media in any of our lifetimes, and everything is swamped by this dominant fact that we have a president who regards the press as the enemy of the people and their products as fake news, who calls frequently for the revocation of licenses, NBC, CBS, ABC, who rails against reporters who don't reveal their sources and suggests that maybe rape in prison would change their minds. That's the landscape that everyone here is having to join in. And now that he's regained the levers of executive power, he's actually redoubled in certain ways at least his legal offensive against some of the media, and he's installing allies with similar mindsets. Kash Patel, we all think about the FBI, but he's someone who said to the media, we're going to come after you. So as The Guardian put it shortly after the election, Trump's wild threats put press freedom in the crosshairs in this very moment. And of course, we have, in addition, a sort of existential crisis where the press is one of the few institutions, others who have been, at least for now, relatively disabled, who have to play the essential part of maintaining constitutional role, constitutional norms, freedom of press, just freedom of thought. So that is, rather than the different topics I said up top, the kind of monumental problem we want to focus on today. To do it, we have a really phenomenal group of nationally prominent practitioners and students of journalism. We could spend the rest of the 40 minutes just introducing them, but we want to get right to the meat of the matter. So everyone forgive me, please, that I'll quickly go through our great panel, starting with Frank Bruni, who is, for his day job, a professor of journalism and public policy at Duke, but also a contributing writer at the New York Times, where he's done everything maybe but copy boy, and even that I'm not sure. Op-ed columnist, White House correspondent, Rome bureau chief, and what about this? Chief restaurant critic. His latest book is titled The Age of Grievance. Welcome, Jonathan. Jelani Cobb is the dean of the Columbia Journalism School. He's also really got two jobs because he's been a staff writer at The New Yorker since 2015. He's the author of The Substance of Hope, Barack Obama and the Paradox of Progress, and To the Break of Dawn, a freestyle on the hip-hop aesthetic. Thanks for joining, Jelani. Jonathan Karl, the chief Washington correspondent for ABC News, co-anchor of This Week with George Stephanopoulos. He has covered every beat in Washington, D.C., the White House, Capitol Hill, the Pentagon, the State Department, cooking possibly, I don't know. Jonathan, thanks for being here. Thank you. And Tyler Pager is the now very recent, as of a few days ago, White House reporter for the New York Times. Previously as a White House reporter for the Washington Post since 2021. There's a whole story there that we won't be talking about today because we have so much to do. All right, let's just start. I want to burrow into some specific points and how they would apply, but Can we start in general terms about the nature and gravity of the problem for the industry? And then I'll try to frame it in terms of specific of Trump's actions from the last few weeks. So, Frank, 10 days, yes, hello. 10 days ago in your great essay, Taking a Red Pen to History, you asked, what happens when a demagogue with grandiose ambitions, few if any scruples, little regard for honesty has, where we now are, at his disposal, an utterly corrupted information environment like ours, when he enjoys a playing field so ideally suited for lies? And this aspect of lies, I'm nowhere near these gentlemen in my experience with journalism, but really come to see as the core issue in Trump 2.0. But that's to set up for anyone to explain what is it that so complicates, media's basic tasks at the moment about this corrupted information environment. How does it aggravate the basic challenges?
Well, I'm not even sure what we mean anymore when we say media, right?
Right.
I mean, we're all up here on the stage representing what might be called legacy media organizations. That's not the way most voters, most Americans are getting their news. And what I think is so concerning, big picture, is when so many consumers, news consumers, to the extent they're even consuming news, are turning to sources that have predetermined orientations, that echo, validate, intensify their own feelings. How do you end up with the same sort of accountability for this administration, for this president, that you've had in the past? Like, people keep on saying, okay, so he's doing X, he's doing Y, we may not like it, it may be concerning, but if Americans' lives don't get better, if they're not feeling good about the country and what he's doing on the job, they will vote him out, they'll turn to Democrats in the midterm, et cetera. I don't know that those kind of dynamics of accountability are the same anymore,
right,
because he will be able to talk to people through news outlets, for lack of a better term, that will launder and excuse what he's doing, and he will use those outlets to, if anything's going wrong, to say, no, it's that person's fault, it's that organization's fault. And I feel, and that you can do that in a way you could never do it before, because we have this incredibly fractured news environment in which so many of the players are not playing it ideologically down the middle.
It's such an important point, and people aren't talking across the silos. I think we just saw a pretty good example in the tariffs, where essentially we knew it was coming, but he got nothing that Canada and Mexico hadn't already provided, but declared victory anyway, and how to try to even penetrate people. In fact, we'll talk about that specifically, but I want to serve it up to all. But don't feel, if you want to say what he said, feel free, because Debbie is harsh at the 36-minute point. But Jelani, please.
So, I think that there are complications to this, one of which, to everything that Frank said, and if we layer onto this, part of our crisis is that people no longer trust what we call legacy institutions. Yeah. The other part of it is their surprising willingness to trust other kinds of institutions. And so it's not simply a collapse of trust or a crisis of faith.
Right.
It becomes a question of why, when the Surgeon General tells you one thing about a particularly virulent virus and a pandemic and what the proper protocols should be, why do you feel that a equally valid second opinion is a random guy who you see on YouTube? And that you hear one person saying, this virus has emerged, it seems to be attacking the respiratory system with all sorts of cascading other effects, and has a disturbingly high fatality rate, and this other person saying this virus doesn't exist. And why are we like,
Yeah.
And so that's part of this crisis as well. And then if we layer on another part of it, which has been the level of antagonism that's been directed at the press, and for that matter, directed at anyone who is not part of the MAGA movement, is astounding. And in part, I think, a product of, in the absence of the Cold War, there is no external enemy that the United States is concerned with. And so not being, determined to best an external opponent has left a kind of psychological and social and political space for us to find the internal opponent, which is exactly the language that Trump used. He referred to the internal enemies in the United States.
And except for some media who now have new pride of place, by the way, in the White House press, OANN, and the. Jonathan Tyler, you want to speak to this, or shall we go to the next?
Well, I would just like to say one thing. It's look, these are all we're in totally uncharted territory here, and I have no idea what direction we're going to go in. There was a worrying development at the Pentagon just days ago when they've basically banished NBC News and the New York Times from the workspace of the Pentagon. It's like, I mean, most people wouldn't. This is like in our world or whatever, but this is kind of significant. I mean, NBC, which is my competitor, but NBC devotes a hell of a lot of resources to covering national security out of the Pentagon. They've got a tremendous producer that goes to work there every day, part of the team there. Her name is Courtney Cobb. He's one of the best journalists covering America's military for the last, decade. And now they're told kind of get out because OAN needs some room here. OAN, which hasn't done anything. So, I mean, NBC will be fine. We've actually at ABC, I think we're going to have an arrangement where they can use some of our space. It's literally like a TV studio out of over there in addition to a workspace. I mean, it'll be okay. But at the White House, the thing that has caused not that to happen is that Donald Trump loves the legacy media. I mean, I remember during the campaign hearing from him after I appeared on Weekend Good Morning America. I mean, I try to get my brother to watch me on Weekend Good Morning America. But he's actually, so far, and certainly in his first 4 years, in many ways, an incredibly transparent president. He engages with the so-called legacy media and also with his friends at Fox and elsewhere. But, he takes questions. He takes phone calls during the campaign. I could get him on the phone easier than I could get the assistant press secretary in Wilmington at the Harris campaign on the phone. And I'm being serious. So, but the people around him have no such fondness and desire to engage in the news organizations you see covered here. So I don't know where it's going to go. Right now, the moderating influence may actually be Donald Trump himself within the Trump administration.
There's a thought. Tyler, I just want to add a kind of legal overlay on this, which in addition, so just this last week, he sued in the campaign in October CBS for what he said was a biased, edited interview with Kamala Harris, which he declined to do. On the other side, it was roundly criticized and called ridiculous, garbage, et cetera. This week, Paramount apparently is looking to settle that case, which they had first called meritless, because the FCC, the official organ of the government, is putting pressure on a merger, totally unrelated, that maybe if you want to get your merger with it in this big deal, you maybe better think about what you're doing. So there are now whole new levers of law available to him with vis-a-vis the media that he's not hesitating to use. Can I move into a concrete one and serve up the same problem to you? Let me, you spoke about, especially John, the problem of lies. Let's just take that first press conference after the aircraft tragedy, where he goes into this sort of Dadaist patter, and all of a sudden it's the fault of the DEI policies of Biden and Obama. On the one hand, he's the president. That's what he says happened. It's colorful. On the other hand, well, give me a break. How should the media, and we're going to have many more like this, how should the media have approached something like that, fully knowing, of course, of the problem that Frank's mentioned that we, in OANN and Fox, they'll be going to town, presumably within an echo chamber of this very point that I just think objectively we, would be called ridiculous by any normal media person.
Yeah, I think we have seen this story play out over the last decade since Trump first ran for president in 2015. And I think the media has continued to figure out exactly how to navigate that. But I do think that there is a clear difference between him as a political candidate and him as a president, and what he says matters. But I think there's a way in which, and I think institutional legacy medias have figured out how to report on what he says with appropriate context and commentary about what it actually means. And so I think, for example, in that press conference, you can't ignore the fact that this is what... Can't ignore the fact that this is what the President of the United States is attributing to a tragedy in Washington. He is, after all, the president and oversees these agencies that are responsible for dealing with that tragedy. At the same time, we have a responsibility to give our readers the full context about what we know about the policies that he is referencing, and being honest about what he's actually saying and the lack of evidence that he's providing for the commentary. And I think you saw that across the board with the questions that he was asked in response to the comments he made from reporters, pressing and pushing him to give any evidence to the assertions that he's made. And we've seen over the course of his political career that has not, it is often he says something and then just moves on. But one thing I just wanted to say on sort of a silver lining, and I think this dovetails with what Jonathan was saying, despite the challenges that we face as the media, most of what the American people and the world know about Donald Trump and about his presidency and about what he has done and is doing is because of legacy media. And so despite the challenges we face and the information ecosystem, it is still true, and in part because Donald Trump engages with the media much more so than I covered the last 4 years every single day of Joe Biden's presidency. The media has engaged more with Donald Trump in the first 2 weeks than I think we did over the course of Joe Biden's 4 years. Yeah. But I also think that it's undoubtedly true that despite our challenges, the media continues to do its job to a remarkable degree, that most of what we know at all about what's going on in the government is because of institutions like the New York Times, like ABC News, like the New Yorker. Those sorts of organizations have proven, despite the roadblocks that have put up in our way, able to uncover and tell the American people and frankly the world what's happening.
Okay, so it sounds like you're giving fairly good marks to the way the media handled this difficult problem. Anyone have any other, different, even of nuanced views about that particular concrete example?
Look, I would just say that, I'm sorry, it's just we have to dispense with the idea that we can ignore him.
Yeah.
There was this whole, we saw this when he came in last time. There was this, don't legitimize him. There was a professor at NYU, journalism professor, who said, send the interns to the briefings. Don't even go. He was legitimized by the Electoral College. Yeah. We have to cover him. You have to pay attention. He's the president of the United States. And it's our job to ask the follow-up questions and cover him.
Yeah.
Okay?
I'm thinking a butt might be coming.
If we don't cover him, he doesn't disappear.
No. Listen,
yeah.
Right? We do not approach a candidate who has attempted to overthrow the government the way that we approach a candidate who has not attempted to overthrow the government.
Totally agree.
Beyond this, one of the fundamental dynamics here has been a kind of will he or won't he approach to things that Trump says, like our coverage of birthright citizenship. And Trump says he's going to get rid of that. Oh, well, this is a constitutional amendment. You can't just do that. Generally, the coverage has been Trump says that he will get rid of birthright citizen. Interesting. Will he do it? And so our job is to actually explain why there is no mechanism to do this without contravening the Constitution itself, like fundamentally. And we have to be willing to risk his ire and his antagonism, which we already get, on some level anyway. The final part is that on the DEI and the plane crash thing, We have heard this before. It is a particular kind of demagogic trait of Trump and Trump's political personality and his movement. Fine, well, and good. The way that we should cover this is to say that the plane crash happened, a military helicopter collided with it, terrible tragedy. The president said something that has no basis in evidence whatsoever, and back on to the grieving families, the grieving nation, et cetera, et cetera. Meanwhile, Elon Musk is taking a wrecking ball to OMB, which has tremendous consequences, and we can't chase down the canard of DEI while this other thing is happening and we're not paying attention. It's like, pay attention to this hand, not what this hand is doing.
Look, the strategy is explicit here. It is flood the zone because they know that we won't be able to pay attention to all of it.
Right. That's why we pick our
This
shots.
is, yes.
That's why I pick. So I've been using this analogy, right, which was in the '80s, purely arcane sports knowledge. There was a boxer by the name of Frank the Animal Fletcher. And anybody who remembers Frank the Animal Fletcher, who there's no reason for you to remember, his strategy was always to overwhelm his opponents, to just have a relentless array of punches from all sorts of directions, all action, all gas, no break, and so on. I thought he was fascinating as a 10-year-old, until once I see him get into a fight with a person who is very judiciously throwing punches in a very specific way, and then weirdly enough, Frank the Animal Fletcher starts to slow down. And then eventually he loses, he gets knocked out, which I thought was impossible. That it was like, strategy is how you respond to people trying to flood the zone. You don't have to respond to every single thing that they do. Or you don't have to respond at scale to every single thing that they do, especially recognizing that the objective is to elicit that kind of response.
Can I serve up, well, I'm sorry, go ahead, Fran. And then I want to serve a sort of general question about the point Jelani's making.
I just wanted to say the coverage I've read did say, he said executive order to get rid of birthright citizenship cannot happen.
Yeah.
I actually think the media,
Yeah,
I've been really heartened
heartened
by the media's coverage, because at a time when the president is trying as hard as he can to intimidate everyone, to create this climate of fear, when he served notice that he is willing to find the most creative ways to file lawsuits, and you have news organizations that have to worry about how much they're going to have to spend to legally defend themselves against the administration. I am not seeing any sort of retrenchment, any sort of cowardice. I mean, I picked up the Times this morning, and in our colleague Peter Baker's story about Gaza-Lago, as I guess it's being called,
T-shirts will be sold in the lobby.
Okay.
Yeah.
But he says right at the top that Netanyahu said it was great that he was thinking outside the box. Then Peter says it's unclear he even knows there is a box or where the box is or whatever. That's like, we've come a long and good distance from the days when we were agonizing over whether we could call something a lie or not. Now I constantly see, he said this about DEI without providing any evidence and with no factual backing. I see those annotations all the time, and I think we're doing a good job of that.
All right, but let me serve up what I think is an implicit point that Jelani's making, even more than that. But I might have thought Randall Tex Cobb would have figured in the story here as well.
That was another sad boxing story.
But look, I think you're making a general point that the legacy media has done a pretty good job in calling out lies, and that is huge. I'm now left the legacy media and more where I take that as 60% of what I try to do. Nope, that's a lie. Nope, that's a lie. Don't forget that's a lie too. But I think Jelani might be saying implicitly, or let me serve up your thoughts, that we're in a certain moment. I personally agree from my kind of legal vantage point, we are in such a moment. Do you think in a moment of at least incipient constitutional crisis that you need to look, the media's job should be not simply to call out lies, but to somehow make itself the defender of constitutional values, free thought, marketplace of ideas, or is it enough to just try to start with this is false, and look to other institutions of government, which right now are not very vigorous, to take these broader points and pushbacks?
You asking me?
Everyone. I mean, I took you to be more or less
No, so I
advocating
think-
something like that, and them not to. So
I think those undertakings are one and the same. That, in doing the things so all the work that we do, my colleague Margaret Sullivan is really good about this. The work that we do is implicitly or sometimes explicitly in service of those constitutional values. That is what we're supposed to be doing. The role and relationship of the press and our elected officials is always supposed to be at least semi-antagonistic. Like, they have power, and we are supposed to be holding that power to check. And so we should anticipate, at least some of this. I do think that there's been a curve, which, by the way, also parallels the curve of the press covering Joe McCarthy for similar reasons, where people began to, over the course of McCarthy's career, point out that something was untrue, or point out that there was no evidence associated with something, or McCarthy is lying, and so on. Not shockingly, both McCarthy and Trump are influenced by Roy Cohn, who was the architect architect of this idea. So that notwithstanding, the other dynamic in here, the thing that I think Jonathan pointed out, is that we are being inundated with lawsuits which are meant to hobble us, in addition to all of the other kinds of things. I'm on the board of the Pulitzer Prizes. We are being sued by Donald Trump for giving the Pulitzer Prize to the Washington Post and the New York Times for their Russiagate coverage. And Trump's lawyers have alleged that this coverage, by the mere fact that we gave them an award for their coverage.
Oh, and you posted the articles on your website too.
Right, and we posted the articles on our website. Right, we posted the articles on our website, but thereby we have defamed him.
And the venue for this lawsuit is a very conservative county in Florida.
Right.
So if it gets to, I mean, this is really dicey stuff.
So this is, but it's also meant to be that no matter what else happens, it's meant to intimidate media by going to the hallmark of what media greatness is, or what news reporting greatness is, which is the Pulitzer Prize, or among one of them. And so if we get slapped on the wrist or we get punished in some sort of way, it is supposed to have a chilling effect on the rest of media. That is the landscape that we're in.
Yeah, and look, I want to hear everyone's thoughts about this, but like we've had a series of suits and capitulations in certain ways from legacy media, and I think a little to our surprise, people rich enough to resist, but who have broad holdings. This is the story at the Washington Post, it's the story of LA Times, it's the story at Disney, but then it does trickle down to is it the Des Moines Register that published a poll that turned out to be wrong. Now they're being sued, and
they're being sued for consumer fraud.
Exactly.
I mean, these are really
well, the CBS suit I just
CBS,
said, by the way, you want to
deceptive
talk
trade
about
practices.
forum
It's like
shopping, was brought in the Northern District, the Amarillo Division of the Northern District of Texas. Why is that? There's one judge who sits there. That judge's name is Matthew Kaczmarek. Does that ring a bell to anybody? Mifepristone, et cetera. So, I mean, it's an assault. But, and that is part of it, I think, so the general point is the media just hope the money's there, the lawyers are there, let them take care of it, and just go on with the truth, or is there a broader agenda that they're called on, as arguably they served in the McCarthy era, to propound? Yeah.
I think one of the biggest challenges for media, and less, I see us less in a form of an activist position, but one of the things that I've been struck by as I've traveled the country and covered campaigns and talked to people is just a lack of fundamental understanding about how we do our jobs. And I think across the board, news organizations have taken for granted the idea that Americans understand what we do and how we go about doing it across the aisle on both of all ages, genders, races. It really there's very few that I think really do understand how we do it, and I think that is one of the biggest challenges we face in our effort to to tell stories, to report the news. And I think news organizations have taken steps to try to be more transparent, separating opinion from news and explaining how we go about doing our jobs. And sort of to Frank's point about when Trump says something and giving readers context of why he can't do that and breaking out separate articles that really explain the various parts of, okay, so he's, birthright citizenship, what does that actually mean? How does the Constitution work? Sort of showing our work more. I think that is one of the things that I see as one of the promising ways to try to get people back to understanding how we go about doing our jobs.
And why does that matter specifically for the moment we're in?
I think it matters specifically for the moment we're in because some of these, the lawsuits that we're seeing, Trump's approach of just suing everyone for whatever he feels like, and when he's aggrieved or upset, which he sort of is the status quo for him, that is trickling down to other people just deciding when they see something they don't like, they just sue. And I think the challenge for media organizations is obviously that's expensive and distracting, but more broadly, it continues to this process of undermining trust in the work that we do. And so I think as journalists, as organizations, we need to do a better job of explaining how we go about getting that story. Why do we have anonymous sources? Why are polls sometimes wrong? As simple as that. And I think there's a real opportunity there to try to start to rebuild trust that way. I think letting people into the process of how we go about doing our jobs is critical to rebuilding that trust with people of all political stripes. And I think that, this idea that you can just sue because you don't like something is not based in reality. And I think that sort of effort is paramount to our ability to try to start to win back the sort of role that the Fourth Estate has played for since the founding of our country.
We have to just do our job the way we've done it before. Look, Trump is very sensitive to everything that's written and said about him. I mean, back to the first time around, you guys remember Sharpie Gate when he said the hurricane was going to Alabama and it was not. So I actually had a role that I didn't really realize at the time in that all happening.
It's all your fault,
It was kind of all my fault. So I was stuck working over Labor Day weekend, and which is when that hurricane was coming up, and Trump had tweeted something that mentioning Alabama as being one of the places that the hurricane was the path, and the National Weather Service put out a tweet saying, actually, it's not coming to Alabama. That was the initial, this is way before he brought out the Sharpie, that was just the initial little thing. Didn't get much attention, it was over a holiday weekend, and I did a story we called a kitchen sink story, because there wasn't much news actually going on, where I was talking about all the various developments out of the Trump White House. And the hurricane thing was like one little mention, 2/3 of the way through my story for weekend. No, it was Monday, it was a holiday, but World News Tonight. But, I was like the guy stuck working. So and he called me into the Oval Office on the Tuesday to say, this bullshit hurricane story. I mean, it was like a frickin' mention. And I was like, anyway, so he's very sensitive to it. And, fortunately, he didn't end up filing any lawsuits or anything, but he did end up, doing the thing with the Sharpie and it ended up being a week-long story over the, so look, we just have to, do our story. I think showing our work is a very much, the election lie, which is such a incendiary one. I wrote an entire book about it. But it was one thing that was important to understand is there are a lot of people that really believe that the election was stolen. And why did they believe that? Well, you had the guy with the biggest, bullhorn on the planet Earth screaming it every day. But it was confusing. If you were following the election nights in 2020 election results, because 9, 10, 11 o'clock, you see Trump's got a big lead. He looks like he's going to win. You go to bed, and you wake up, and suddenly, wait a minute, it looks like he might be losing. What happened? Well, and then so you explain, and there were reasons for this. The way the different states count their votes, and Pennsylvania, waits until polls close to even begin opening up and counting the mail-in votes. That's why it took so long, and and just explaining what you saw with your own eyes, not just shorthand. Oh, they lied about the election.
Right.
But explain what actually happened.
Can I have a 30-second
please.
Footnote to the show your work point, which is, I think, one of the fundamental things. We've done a very poor job of explaining to the public how we operate. So then when charlatans say that we just go to our cubicles and make it up, they really don't have a counterpoint for it. At the New Yorker, which is known for its really forensic fact-checking, when you file a story, you also file a second document that has all of your material, everything that you've reported, audio links of your interviews, everything that if someone wanted to pat down that story, they could frisk away. This is it. We should publish that. We should, for digital stories, have a link that says how this story was reported. And so if you so desire, and you have time that weekend, you could go report that story yourself and get the same result. I got a tip that sent me to file a FOIA for this agency where I got this document, which led me to call this elected official, which led me then to talk to this attorney, who then I got this information, which then turned into this story. That doesn't solve the entire problem, but that solves part of the problem. In journalism, we think of this as a public trust. We could borrow some things from the social sciences and the hard sciences where you have to be able to replicate something or it doesn't matter. Or you have to have a footnote that points to something or it doesn't matter. And we have to kind of utilize the best of those tools that are available.
Well, let me push back on that, though, in terms of the part of the problem that it doesn't solve, because you're right. And I think there are sources out there now if you wanted to track it down. But the people whom you want to track it down don't want to track it down. In fact, they didn't read your primary piece. I mean, we've referred to this a few times. Frank started with this sort of silo problem that's in politics, but certainly in media. It seems near insoluble that there's a certain cadre of people who get their facts only within a ecosphere, it's because it's not just Fox, it's sort of, and even to the right. And it may be a problem that's bigger than media, but what do you do? And I just want to state it in terms of, or present it in terms of not just media, but like democratic self-governance, because the impact is we don't agree, the country doesn't agree on what the truth is, what the facts are for so many important points. And how do you self-govern? How do you debate about policies? How do you make informed decisions if you can't even get to that square one? Now, I'm not expecting you, especially in 7 minutes before Debbie pulls the plug, to solve that problem, but I wonder, how you are grappling with it, and if there are lessons from Trump 1.0 that you can apply to try to penetrate what seems like just a cement wall to the sky that is where 40% or so are getting their news.
Oh, that's an easy one. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, no problem. Go ahead, Frank.
You can do, just whisper.
We have faith in you, Frank.
Yeah,
Do
no,
it.
I don't think it's fixable. I'll just say two.
You don't think it's fixable? Okay,
No, I don't
yeah.
think. I mean, once cable came along, and then the internet, I don't think we're going to get back to a place where we're agreeing on what the best source is and where a critical mass of people are getting their information in the same way. But there are a couple of things we can think about that are maybe minor tweaks or improvements. One is I think we have to talk, and I see this as a university professor, I think we need to talk to students and before the university level about the consumption of news and information, how they put together their news diet, and what a legitimate versus an illegitimate source is. I find in my classes at Duke, and I do this in almost every class at some point, it's easy to get this in, I find that when I ask students to go through the major things they have bookmarked or that they're following or whatever the right verb is, and to look at sort of whether there's any kind of variety in that and what it is, they end up realizing and admitting they have a news menu that is not one they set up with a lot of consideration. And they're actually willing to tweak it because what they realize is that it really isn't aligned with their values and whom they want to be. If we started having conversations, not just in school, but on the soccer field, around the dinner table, about the consumption of information, about what news is, about what it can be, and how you can use it for the best of democracy in your life, I think we'd have more conscious consumers, and that would be better. And one other thing that I think people don't realize is we now have the ability, because most people are reading online. Yeah. We have the ability to measure audience and know what they're doing like never before. I mean, we have tools at the Times. How much time have you spent with the story? Like, did you get to the bottom? Did you come to it from an iPhone? Whatever. we as news consumers are getting the news we're asking for more than ever before because our consumption, our habits can be measured. So we all, I think, should be more conscious about what we're subscribing to, what we're consuming, what we're spending time on, because that ends up being echoed back to us.
Well, and one thing that I would add to that we've been having conversations about as we headed into the second term of Trump is having, reckoning more with some of the real ideas for change that are emanating from this 2.0 movement. And this is controversial and provocative, but someone like Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who is looking like he's on a glide path, or not now, a glide path to be confirmed at the Senate, his ideas about food and medicine are incredibly provocative, but also have influence and interest in pockets of communities that would surprise you. And I think from institutions that have long just said, it's either this idea or that idea, more seriously reckoning with the ideas for change and disruption that clearly Americans are clamoring for. They saw Trump 1.0 and they wanted to do it again. And so I think that in terms of bettering and broadening our audiences, going in with a more critical eye of not just they want disruption for disruption, but more seriously understanding what these people who voted for Trump, what the people who didn't vote for Trump, where some of the ideas align, and really giving more serious due to some of the more specific policies that I think have support in communities that would surprise you.
Yeah, something beyond the constant outrage of the day. And I would add to that, just as journalists, I think one thing, spend some time understanding the information flow that those people are getting. I mean, check out what Steve Bannon is saying.
This is for us, or this is for media?
I think this is for us, but I think it's for, understand the other information streams. I was just mentioning, tune in every once in a while to what Steve Bannon is saying on War Room. It's an incredibly influential, program within that world. Before he got fired, I felt I needed to kind of see what Tucker Carlson was saying. Because it was massively influential, not because I wanted to agree with him. I mean, I'm not watching to affirm. I mean, get a sense of what is being said. This, understanding where Bobby Kennedy is coming from, not just the quick, outrage, anti-vax. He's, but what is driving these people, and what are their sources of information, and it helps you round out your coverage so it speaks to I'm not saying to emulate it, obviously, but understand it.
So you actually feel the media has been, the legacy media, the big guns, have been deficient in their understanding of the...
I think we've been very, first of all, I hate talking generally about the media for Frank's reasons. Yeah. But, if I can generalize, it's like the singular focus on one story over and over and over again, which we saw in the 3 years leading up to the election, which was, Trump, outrage, 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 outrage. And there was plenty of things to talk about that you could say were outrageous. But, widen the aperture a little bit and don't be so singularly focused.
All right. We know that Debbie is and I wanted to thank her, by the way, along with Deborah and Jamie Kabler, but anyone want to take these last 45 seconds to offer thoughts there? We're going to be silenced immediately.
Oh, okay, all right. I'm going to say really quickly. So we've talked about all the problems in media, all the problems in journalism, all the crises. One of the things that I do in my position as dean of a journalism school is I look at the whole landscape. And, but for those really dark clouds, we would be talking about this as one of the most innovative, dynamic periods in American media history, period. There's so much happening. People are working really hard. There are all kinds of innovative thoughts into solving the problems that we have. The problems are still here with us, but I have faith that we have the potential to actually address them.
That was...
To the money.
Well
Please
timed.
join me in
Yeah.
thanking our great
you.
panel.